name is Neil Dash, and this conversation is going to be about prosocial design, which, how many of you are familiar with that field? It's matter in hands. It's about making the good internet, right? And these are all folks who are experts in that field. So you're going to be lucky to get to talk about people who are deep in that area. And a lot of what they're talking about is, years and years of work, but also cutting edge of what's happening in the future. So to get started, I'm going to have everybody here talk about their specific lens, the work that they've been doing, and then we'll talk about how all those dots connect. So we're going to start here with Tobias. A little bit of background on what he's been doing, then we'll go down the row, and then we'll jump into the broader conversation.
Hi guys. My name is Tobias Roslakwo. I wrote a book called The Outreach Machine. I'm a designer by training and have been working on issues of prosocial tech for a very long time. I'm mostly interested right now in ways to amplify human agency through our tools, and that's my kind of primary focus.
Hi, everyone. Oh, is this on? It is. Hi, everyone. My name is Trisha Prabhu, and my experience designing for prosocial outcomes in digital spaces began when I was 13, when I was in the 8th grade. I had a school science fair project, and I was interested in wanting to take on this issue of cyberbullying that I had seen was this problem that was affecting so many young people. And so I had this simple idea. I thought, what if I could give young people who were about to post or send something that could be offensive a chance to pause and rethink? So I designed a small prototype. And I tested this idea with young people, at my school and in my community, to get a sense of whether it might work. And I discovered it was, actually effective in encouraging young people to pause and think twice before they communicated. And today, this concept is known as friction. So that was my intro into the space. I'm now the founder and president of Rethink Citizens. We're a nonprofit with the goal of educating and empowering youth to create the digital world that they want to live in. So, among our initiatives, we encourage aspiring digital change makers to, pursue their ideas to make the internet better. And I think that's, a small example of what the future of prosocial digital design can be, which is youth-led and youth-driven. And then I also am currently pursuing a law degree, and I'm interested in pivoting towards, a different lens with respect to prosocial design, influencing, legislation and regulation to make the internet safer by design.
Hi, everyone. My name is Viraj Doshi. I work on the platform safety team at Snap. So what we do at Snap on my team is try to emphasize the good and decrease the bad as much as we can for our Snapchat community. One of the favorite things I get to do about my job is some of the more proactive work. So I'm sure we'll get into it, but some of the research that we get to do, trying to emphasize what are some of the harms that teens are facing online, what are some of the awareness that parents have about those harms, and what can tech companies do about potential gaps, and then also leading some of our proactive work in making sure that young people's voices are incorporated both at the tech design level, but then also at the legislative and regulatory level. So recently we just launched teen councils. We have a teen council in the US, one in Australia, and one in Europe. And again, the point there is how can we make sure that young people's voices are really heard and emphasized throughout any sort of design process. So really excited to be here for this conversation.
Hey everyone, I'm Allie Miller. I lead all the product marketing efforts at Pinterest for well-being and trust and safety. I've been at Pinterest for about 6 months now. Prior to that, I was at Meta for 7 years, also similarly working in product marketing. I started there on Facebook News, working on the Facebook Journalism Project, moved on to misinformation, and eventually ended my time there in teen safety. So things like the teen accounts launch, parental controls, et cetera. And for me personally, I mean, echoing some of the sentiments people have already said is, I have an 8-year-old son and he loves gaming, which means he loves Twitch streamers, he loves YouTubers. And I see the way he interacts with these platforms and being able to engage with him in a really honest way about sort of what he's seeing, what I've seen in the past, things that we can do to manage the time better together. I know he's 8, he clearly doesn't have a device, but he likes to look at this stuff. He knows more than I think that, I knew. I mean, even as a teenager working online, he knew stuff. And I like the idea of like working with youth to try to help them build a better internet for the future, right? Like I think that they know more than we give them credit for, and we can work with them to build sort of safety mechanisms, pro-social design that speaks to their lived experience. That's what I'm really excited about at Pinterest for the next year.
So it's really telling. The conversation about pro-social design around trust and safety immediately goes to talking about the kids, talking about the teens, right? We always say, what about the children? And I want to start there. There's a lot more of the conversation, but let's start there. And I think the right person to start with is you, Tricia, because your career in this work started when you were a teenager. And I'm curious about, now that you have an adult lens on it, how has the conversation changed or your perspective on it changed from when you started that work, how people talk to you about it, to what you see on it now? Like, how has that evolved? And, is that promise real? Do you feel a little bit different on how you see it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because yes, I first got into the space when I was 13, and I think I think there was a lot of interest in pro-social design, and I think there still is. I mean, the reception, to my work, which I'm so grateful for, was really positive, and I think broad-based, positive reception. We should be, investing in these kinds of mechanisms to help people interact more intentionally online, and to start with the good. I mean, I think it's worth noting, the fact that we're here and there's a field in a space called responsible tech, and David deserves credit for that, is an incredible thing. I mean, when I started this work, that was not a thing. Responsible tech was not a thing. Friction was not, in the lingo. Even conversations about cyberbullying, that was not really, a conversation that was being had. So the amount of progress that's been made is remarkable. There's also so many more youth-led organizations in the space doing awesome work, like Young People's Alliance and Design It For Us. So the fact that we've seen that progress is amazing. On the other hand, I think it's been a story of like steps forward and steps backwards. The fact that you can see standards appear and then go away, or the fact that like some of this work has become pretty polarized or charged, so it can be difficult to talk about safety or guardrails that feel fundamental. I think that's a key issue, and so for me, I think the question it raises for me is whether we need like legislation or regulation to set standards. And obviously, with youth, I think that's where there tends to be the most bipartisan, support, is, regulation for young people. But I think it's worth having a conversation about like what standard setting would look like for all digital citizens, especially as all of us, start to engage increasingly with powerful technologies. And we've seen a lot of regulation already at the state level, the federal level, internationally. Some of those approaches appeal to me more than others. But I think as a general principle, I think it would be valuable for lawmakers to be thinking about a regulatory strategy that puts prosociality at the heart of users' experiences online.
And Tobias, now you wrote a book starting to give us some context about how this sits into sort of a larger historical trend. And maybe you give a little bit of background about the book and then sort of how this might set up where we're at in the conversation right now.
Sure, yeah. So the premise of my book was really that there's kind of nothing new under the sun when it comes to the dynamics of new media technology being captured by very specific radical actors to advance political agendas and to change the norms of society. So I bring us back through kind of the history of different technological shifts and talk about every major new media technology and how it has disrupted our capacity for making sense of the world and has fundamentally changed our kind of morals and our norms. We're going through these periods now where the shifts are happening much, much faster and the new innovations are coming much quicker at us. But I think the pattern remains roughly the same in terms of how we are becoming, how a small group of people can maximize the utility of a new platform and change the minds of a lot of people. And there's this thing about it there that's present, which is kind of the the asymmetry of passion. It's like a lot of users are not looking at a piece of tech and saying, oh, I need to advance my agenda using this particular thing. But there are these waves of kind of transitions in moral norms that happen when a new piece of technology comes on the scene and changes the game for everyone. And I think we're in the middle of that right now with tremendous regulatory capture and with how the norms, as you were saying, have been kind of, we take a step forward and we seem to have a vision of what good, responsible tech looks like, and then we, it's stripped away by a bad actor. X taking some steps to really, unfortunately, not help us realize the potential of these tools.
So looking at the current state of the art, though, right, is we have practitioners with us here who are doing the work. I'm curious about, and Ali, we'll start with you. What does it look like in the current landscape, right? This is maybe the hardest environment we've had since this field has existed. What does it look like when you've stepped into this role relatively recently, working with a new team? Like, what does the state of play look like? What are you able to do in telling a story there?
No, it's a really good question. And I mean, going off of sort of what you guys were just saying too, it's, we're talking about pro-social design, but we're in a moment where it feels like there isn't like a definition of social right now with people, right? Like people are not on the same page. Like I said, I started working 7 years ago on Facebook News, Facebook Journalism Project. A lot of those projects don't exist anymore. People are pushing out the information on the systems algorithmically. There's not really the curated approach to things. One of the things that I think we do really, really well at Pinterest that really appeals to me, and I think it's a big component of pro-social design though, is centering the user. And what I mean by that, it's not just like preventing harms. How do we sit there and make sure that they're not like seeing absolutely terrible content? How do we go forward and like make them feel belonging, make them feel like they want to be on the platform? They're having a good time. They're having a good experience. It's time well spent. And we're making our technology additive to a person's life, not addictive, right? It's serving a purpose for them. It's bringing them there and making them feel a sense of, self-worth and a sense of, like I said, belonging. So one of the things we do there that I think is really cool is that we've integrated, using our AI, some inclusivity features. So what I mean is like somebody can go in and like see somebody that looks like them, skin tone, hair type, body type, and like tell them to like show more of that content, right? So that you can see yourself in the content you're consuming. And what we've found there is that actually is really great for Pinterest, frankly. Like people who see those tools and they use them and they're seeing themselves in the product, they're pinning 75% more than anyone else. They are coming back. We are also doing really well with youth for that reason. Over 50% of our monthly average users are coming from Gen Z. So they like this. Younger users want to see inclusivity. They want to see a more positive environment. They don't want to be constantly assaulted when they come online, right? They want to be able to kind of walk away from that and have that sort of haven away from sort of toxicity and bullying. So I think really thinking it through, one of the cool things that we're doing is like, who are these users and what do they want to see, not just what should they not see. So it's more designing with pro-social intent in mind and like driving an outcome versus trying to take away an outcome.
I love hearing that what you're moving towards positively, but I'm curious about, from talking about the negative part, is there an understanding that there is risk there, right? Because I think the perception is like Pinterest is where I go to pin, like I'm going to make my living room look cozy, right? So, right. But people aren't thinking about, is there something there that is a danger? Is there something there that's a risk? Is that something institutionally that's understood, or is that something where there's still having to make the case and having to present, the argument for resourcing for working on the problem?
It's something that I'm happy to say that we do proactively look at that sort of stuff at Pinterest. We have a robust trust and safety team that is really invested in sort of that invisible behind the scenes work, right? Where you're making sure that people aren't being shown like risky or negative content. We're also trying to think this content through in terms of context, right? Because there are some types of content that are not negative in and of themselves, but if a user is consuming too much of that content, so my example would be like like weight loss or fitness content. Somebody is consuming tons of that. That's something they might come to Pinterest for because you are on a health journey and you want inspiration. But if you're looking at it constantly, that might be a sign that there's something that we can do differently to help you to pivot off of that, to go to a more body neutrality place. So we're looking at stuff like that internally to see how we can, again, move away from just like a hard line, you've searched a negative term, here's a blocker, to more proactive interventions we can do to make sure that we're giving users a safe experience, again, all behind the scenes. I think that we do a great job of it. People view Pinterest as safe, but that's because of the great work that that engineering team is doing to keep people safe.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about the same, perception, or Snapchat, I think, is sort of seen as this sort of benign, experience in people's lives, which is probably a compliment, right? If that takes a lot of work behind the scenes. What are the parts that we're not seeing? What are the conversations that make that possible?
So I think a couple of different things on that. So I think there's one, how are different platforms and social media applications built in the first place, the basic architecture of that. So Snapchat was initially started in response to what our founders were experiencing on traditional social media at the time in 2012, 2013. And so as a result of what they weren't enjoying about that experience, they built Snapchat a little bit differently. And so there are no public friend lists, there are no public likes. When you open up the app, it opens up to the camera. And what we find is that the majority of our users spend the majority of their time on the chat feature and the camera feature, which is great because that's what the founders of Snapchat, and that's what all of us at Snapchat really want to focus on is community and creation and engaging with people that you know in real life through Snapchat. And so there's that kind of basic architecture that already exists, and then there's enhancements that you can make kind of as you see people abusing your systems or users themselves engaging in behavior where you think you can make a good intervention. And one of the things that my team gets to do is we run a research project. It's called the Digital Wellbeing Index. It's something we survey 10,000 people, which includes teens, young adults, and then parents of young teens across 6 different countries, the US, 3 countries in Europe, Australia, and India, to get a sense of what young people are experiencing online. Are they doing well online? Do they say they're doing well? And then, what sort of risks are they experiencing? In what capacity are they experiencing those risks, not just on Snapchat, but across the entire ecosystem? And then what are parents doing about those risks? And what are teens doing about those risks themselves? And so I brought my notebook because there's some interesting insights, and I wanted to make sure I got these numbers correctly. So, and all of these numbers are publicly available, so don't feel the need to track. Yeah. So what we found, so again, 10,000 people that we surveyed, which included teens and young adults, 80% of the young adults and teens said that they experienced some sort of risk online. So that, risk is a very broad umbrella term that can mean, threats of violence, that could mean unwanted contact, that could mean cyberbullying, but it is a really, really high number. And then to get into more specifics there, of the young people who responded, they said 40% said that someone was grooming them online, or they were participating in some sort of grooming behavior. 30% said they were catfished, and 25% that said that their device was hacked. Over 50% said that they were involved in some sort of intimate imagery. So that means being asked to share intimate imagery, actually sharing intimate imagery. And of the 21% of people who shared intimate imagery, 60% said that they lost control of those images, which made them prime candidates for sextortion, financial sextortion. So knowing those sorts of data sets kind of helps us prioritize internally around what are some of the mitigations that we want to implement in app? What are some of the things that we can do at Snapchat where we know a bunch of young people, a lot of young people are using our apps. What can we do to kind of promote certain sorts of information to make sure that they're aware of these sorts of risks? One thing, it's not all, doom and gloom. One thing that we saw in this past study is that over 70% of young people are now asking for help with trusted adults, family members, friends, and that number is up 12 points from just 2 years ago. So just in the past 2 years, we saw a 12% increase in young people asking for help when they're experiencing one of these risks online. The flip side of that is that when it comes to sexual risks, so for example, financial sextortion, we see a big gap. And parents, there's actually an 18-point gap between what teens say that they're doing online, for example, sharing intimate imagery, and what parents think that their kids are doing online. And so, there's a couple of reasons, we've been kind of toying around with why is that, right? And, a couple of things that come to mind is oftentimes parents don't want to think of their kids as sexual beings, so they have that blind spot. And then what we found also through our research is that parents are very, very aware of, these sorts of risks existing online, but they don't ever think it could happen in their household, right? And so again, that sort of gap and that sort of data kind of gives us more insight, and I think the broader industry more insight into opportunities. There's a real opportunity there to work with parents and to make sure that teens feel comfortable going to their parents when they're experiencing a risk, but then also making sure parents know what their teens are likely engaging in online, and so that they can be prepared to have those sorts of conversations, because we know those sorts of conversations are really important.
And just real quick, Tricia, a lot of your work has been in the area of interventions at the point of sharing information, at the point of engaging. What's the pattern you've seen broadly in your research about, does it work, right? If you catch people at the point when they are reacting, engaging, what do we know about how effective that is?
Yeah. So, my study, which I conducted when I was 13, but, my study.
Little
that
flex.
Yeah.
I like it.
That I conducted as a teenager, I think I worked with 300 young people in my school, in my community, and found that it was extremely effective. And so, it was, I think, the willingness to post a message like "you are so ugly" in the small social media prototype I had created, where some young people had access to a message that would say, "Hold on, are you sure you want to say that?" And other people did not. The willingness to post dropped from 71% in a given context to 4%, right? So it was actually very effective. And there are, friction now has, there are organizations that are exploring, that concept and deploying it in a lot of different environments at scale, where I'm sure, you see different patterns. But I think the lesson is more just ultimately our digital experience is shaped by design. Right? Design is at the heart of everything. And so, this idea that something as simple as just creating more of an opportunity for us to think online can allow us to reclaim our humanity in interactions and conversations is illustrative of a bigger takeaway, which is we have to be really conscious of the way that little design choices in our our internet architecture and in our platforms shape how we show up and how we interact, and whether especially for young people we can be safe. So as someone who is also interested in the regulation side, I don't think that any of this is a silver bullet. I don't think it's a like a perfect fix. But what I do think it enables us to do is to ensure we're making, in some cases, the smallest tweaks, right? It's a very small tweak, but the smallest tweaks that can set, especially young people up, for success online. And that's just not just a good, in and of itself, but I think it also has positive ramifications, the prosociality piece. But then, this idea that young people know, okay, I'm in the driver's seat, and my choices actually do have an effect on, my digital environment. I think that creates the buy-in to be prosocial. Right? It's realizing you're part of a community, having that prompt, that's valuable too.
I know, could I jump in there? Kind of, Tricia, to your point around creating friction, and kudos to you for doing this when you were 13. It probably impacted how Snap was thinking about it many years later. Recently, we started to put in-app warnings or kind of prompts for when a teenager specifically got a friend request who they shared no mutual friends with. We would put in just a quick prompt, to your point, nothing fancy, that said, "Hey, you don't share any mutual friends with this person. Are you sure you want to be friends with this person?" And what we saw in just the initial 6 months that we launched that, it led to 12 million blocked accounts just right there. Right, so that's an example, I think, Tricia, of what you're saying around, small tweaks like that can lead to big changes. And what we kind of viewed that as just an opportunity to give teens an opportunity to breathe, to take a second, to arm them with more information, to make the best decision for themselves, and for them to take more control of their digital experience. And so based off that success, we've launched new prompts. One, if someone who's trying to friend them has been blocked or reported by other people, we give that information to teens. And then if we know that someone is in a location that's not local to where the teen is, if they've shared their location with Snap, then we say, hey, this person doesn't seem to be in your area. Are you sure that you want to be friends with them? Again, the idea being that they could still say yes. They still have that control ability. But we want to give them as much information as we can so that they can make those decisions for themselves. And we're continually looking for new signals and new types of information that we should share kind of at that moment of friending. And I think it's been a powerful tool for us.
Trisha, what you just said, I found pretty interesting. It's just that the design informs culture to some degree, right? That we're actually, when we're entering into these spaces, there's a lot of implicit norms that we don't necessarily acknowledge, right? That there's a reason why a lot of these platforms become more toxic is because early actors will go in and start using it in a very specific way. And we infer those norms by looking around in these spaces. The same way we walk into this room, you guys are all sitting here comfortably and carefully, paying attentively. You're not yelling, you're not heckling us yet. The language of those norms is set by the design affordances of the platform at the outset. And we don't talk about that enough, and how to, when we think about resetting those norms actively, their design plays such an important role in that. I think that, an analogy I use when we think about our current social media environment, it's a bit like a large industrial slum we have essentially built over the course of just a few years, right? That now houses 4 billion people. A little bit extreme of an analogy, I know, but we don't have much of the safety infrastructure setup that we've learned from other. From years of trial and error, right? We don't have the crosswalks, we don't have the stoplights, and people are just causing all this harm kind of inadvertently because we don't have those particular frictions set up, essentially the healthy frictions set up. So I just want to note that norm setting is one of the most important things that we can do in these spaces.
Yeah, and that actually leads to one of the questions I really wanted to ask all of you, which is, one of the assumptions of prosocial design is that we're all trying to make prosocial spaces, right? There used to be a consensus that we're trying to make designs that are going to encourage people to be their best selves. Two of you used to work at Meta, you don't anymore. You used to work at Google, you don't anymore. People shift through, whether it's different companies that they work at or different roles, and we've seen a pretty radical shift, and especially I think in the AI era, the industry consensus around what we are trying to build, what we're trying to enable, ain't the consensus anymore. I'm curious about how much are you feeling that shift under your feet, and how much are you feeling there be attention about whether it is getting resources or getting buy-in or even just agreement about we're supposed to do this to protect the kids or protect anybody else, or being in that field years ago, we used to think maybe there are even groups other than kids we might want to protect.
No, I mean, I was actually just going to say exactly that. It's one of those things that we say sort of internally at Pinterest when we're talking about building some of these features that are, teen-centric, but we say what's good for teens is most likely good for almost anyone. It would be hard-pressed to say that everyone wouldn't do well with, like you were saying, that pause, that second to take a breath and actually look at what you are being served and make a decision based on, transparency and plain speak that actually says this is what this is going to do if you click yes. So it's been really interesting to see, like you said, this sort of lack of consensus as people are just sort of sprinting forward right now. We're in an interesting space where a lot of these AI tools are fairly new, and you're now starting kind of from the bottom, and we could be building with safety and well-being in mind from the beginning. We can start from that place. And that is something again, at Pinterest that we are doing with our tools is sort of what are the risk points that somebody might have that people are coming, you said it earlier, it's doing their living room, doing their fashion week stuff. That doesn't mean somebody's not going to come and use our AI and ask it a risky or bad or upsetting question. So we need to be prepared for those sort of inevitabilities. And also, how can we leverage our AI tools to serve a better experience for the user? Again, additive, not addictive. but yeah, it's disheartening to see people sort of just sprinting forward and not really thinking through the ramifications. It's the same mistake that was made many years ago now with how a lot of the social platforms were put together. It was very designed for addiction, like I said, not really for what the purpose would be for a user. How do we keep them on it and keep them using it and like keep them attached to their devices? So I'm hopeful that with some of these companies like ourselves, like leading the way and saying, can we actually put some interventions in place? We can challenge the rest of the industry to do the same thing. But yeah, I'm not going to lie. It is a little disheartening at times to see some of the headlines that come out where people are just not thinking this through in advance before they kind of go forward with a launch or go forward with putting something out there.
Yeah, I think what I would say is, Trish, to kind of what you were saying before, we're at this new wave of AI technology, but back in the day, there wasn't a such thing as responsible tech. Getting a room like this together didn't necessarily exist 10 to 15 years ago. So I do think, while there is that reality, I do think that we're at an interesting opportunity where we can be much more thoughtful about certain things. And there are a lot of lessons learned that can apply. And even the two panels before us, like the plethora of experience and expertise and thoughtfulness that's going into the design of some of those systems, for me, is really, really heartening. And I think, to your point, there are companies that have existed the past 10 to 15 years that are now introducing AI models into their services, Snapchat being one of them. We have a My AI chatbot. And so we're able to kind of leverage the lessons that we've unfortunately had to learn over the past 10 years as we build out those features. And we will learn more things as we kind of launch those new AI features as well. But at least from what I've seen internally, while there has been a shift, I do think that the resources and the plethora of expertise in these companies has maintained, and I think people are still just as passionate about making sure we're emphasizing the good, like you said, Anil.
And I think, like I said, steps forward, steps backward. But I think, one bright spot that I'll highlight from my own work with Rethink Citizens is, I think, the youth-led piece and the work that young people are doing to re-envision what the internet can be. We have a youth coalition initiative where we invite young aspiring digital change makers with ideas to make the digital world better into a 6-week virtual program where they can refine their ideas, they can iterate on them. Some of them already have products. They can build those out further. So we invited 9 young people for the first time last year from Chicagoland, which is where I'm from. And it was so gratifying to be able to work with these young people. But more than that, the ideas were really awesome. So there was one youth coalition participant who had an idea, was exploring an idea for an online tool that would, among other things, give the user an ability to ethically license their digital content to prevent unauthorized AI training. And that's a potentially, powerful proactive intervention because it's not about offering a remedy after the fact. It's about addressing the harm itself. So I think we've seen a lot of young people and a lot of youth-led orgs step up to do some really awesome work. So if there's something that, makes me hopeful, I think it is definitely the power of that work to do good.
Yeah, I think that's something that makes me hopeful. Think about that for a second. But yeah, no. There's hope. There is hope, guys. Bridging-based algorithms. The fact that we have community notes-like tools that are now that basically went from a science project to being deployed across 3 billion users in a 5-year period. That's pretty amazing. I think that Community Notes has a long way to go in terms of solving or contributing to more factual information and consumption patterns. But that is like an incredible success story, and in a lot of ways, I think that if we were able to both make it work faster before the viral peak, so that more people were able to see it early on. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Community Notes, right? Okay. And then also, I think we need to give it teeth. That would be the biggest intervention that would help, I think, which was if you are a repeat bad actor, someone that's noted multiple times, then you get transparently your reach reduced in for a certain duration of time. I think that would be the fastest intervention that would dramatically improve our collective discourse online. So
That's incredible. we're going to do a quick speed round of everybody's wish going forward. If you waved your magic wand, I just want to say, actually, for the last two things you both raised, Tricia, to your point, I've been doing a lot of work in the sort of AI content licensing space, and I've seen the same thing organically happening of sort of young people. I keep saying it's like the generation that's grown up listening to Taylor's version knows that intellectual property is something that matters. They can't articulate it the right way, so I think there's something happening there. But it's that same spirit, right? I think the work that all of you have done has sort of set the groundwork where people are starting to expect there should be the right thing happening, even if they can't say it in their own words or, with the language of an expert. So just to wrap up, we'll go quickly down the line. If you had the right resources, the right alignment, you had the right support, what's your wish list about prosocial design going forward that you'd love to see happening in the space, happening in the industry?
I just said mine. So
You got yours, go ahead.
I mean, I kind of said mine, but I think it'd be great if we had, and I think there's actually, I want to shout out, they may be here, but Emma Lemke and Stephen Rosenbaum at the Sustainable Media Center are running a new initiative called Activate Media, where the idea is to take young people and have them work alongside policymakers and developers to envision new social media platforms and alternative digital business models. And my dream would be to have the resourcing to support that kind of initiative, because I think that kind of experimental work could be very powerful.
I think there's folks in the room who can help make that happen.
On that note, like Tricia, what you were saying around young people working alongside policymakers and kind of influencing tech design. I mentioned our teen council program. So we have one in the U.S., Australia, and Europe. Our teen council in the U.S. just had the opportunity to engage with the First Lady's office about the Take It Down Act most recently. And so I do think there's an incredible amount of energy around younger generations right now. They are incredibly savvy and informed, and they really know kind of what they want online, and they're not shy about expressing it. And I think they're doing really, really amazing things. So what I would want to see is more opportunities for young people. And I think it's great that so many different companies have similar youth councils. So more opportunities for more young people to get involved. And then also more opportunities for young people's voices and stories to be platformed on social media sites. So Snapchat, for example, we have in-app resources. So if someone searches a drug term, we will surface a certain resource or a video. What we've heard from our teen council is all of those videos need to be by teens, and they can't be a scripted story. It has to be a real story, because we can tell BS immediately, and I'm going to scroll to the next thing in 2 seconds. And so we've been able to incorporate some of our teen council voices into some of the programming that we've been doing, some of the resources that we've been doing. So I would love to see more teen voices being promoted, at critical times on people's digital journeys.
Allie, our last word.
It's very interesting that, you mentioned Teen Council, you're mentioning projects that young people are doing to build a better internet. You're talking about community notes. One thing that's been a through line through all of this, I feel like for all of us, is the concept of human beings, people. They actually want this. They want the internet to be a better place. They want digital literacy. They want control over their experiences. So for me, I've been racking my brain about this. Mine is actually, I think, hopefully a very simple ask that I would love to have happen, which is a radical digital literacy project for everyone. People are asking for this information. They're asking for help. You look at polls of, again, teens, and it's 70% of them are I know I'm on my device too much, but I don't have the tools to not feel like I'm missing out if I'm not constantly online. How do we help them through massive projects that we can do as an industry to provide radical transparency, provide tooling, and provide them the education they need as to A, how our products can help them, and B, why it's important, why these things are important, not just self-serving, our products are good for everyone. What is well-being? What is mental health? What is digital literacy? And give them what they need. And that's what I think everyone's actually just asking for from us.
That sounds like exactly the question that we need to answer. These sound like the folks whose work we need to be supporting. Will you all join me in thanking them for their opposition today? Thank you.